Hey everyone, this is week 31, day 3. So, this is our week about presence. We are trying to identify the traces that our actions leave behind. So, on Monday, we painted a mound of dirt. On Tuesday, for Spanish Tuesdays, Martes Español, we painted a plate with a very tight aluminum foil over it. And for today, we'll see how we try to resolve this very, very beautiful theme. Okay, let's get started. This is going to be our third day on our ongoing Presence Week. And just as a small recap, on Monday, we found this concept of presence, the traces, the evidence that we leave behind in a simple mound of dirt. We were able to identify that even though it was just a bit of earth that was displaced in a way, it spoke about 3 moments of time at the same time. It spoke about the present while I was observing it. It signaled the past in the sense that there was a human being that was responsible for having dug up this earth and constructed this pile of dirt. And it pointed towards the future where that pile of earth was going to go back to its origin into earth, or was going to be further displaced and put somewhere else. On yesterday's painting for Spanish Tuesday, what we noticed was that there are also small echoes of our actions that can be found in everyday life. And the one that we spotted on yesterday was a kind of poetic one where I spotted this plate that had this very taut, and the tension that was part of the very nature of that foil that was on top of the plate. To me, it really pointed to the fact that somebody had actually cooked something and placed it into this plate and then decided to cover it up with this foil and had decided that there was going to be this amount of tension in this aluminum foil. Even though it's a very quiet painting, it actually speaks about a very physical act that was behind the pulling of this paper. When we try to wrap this paper around, be it a plate or, whatever you're covering with aluminum foil, you have to exert some sort of force, but you're also very aware of the fragility of the surface. So it's actually a very almost anxious driven act where you know that at any point this thing can just tear and then you have to replace it. So in this small everyday act, in this object, there is an enormous amount of drama to it just by trying to paint the taut quality of that aluminum foil on top of that plate. I actually love how these little moments in our quotidian life, when we examine them, we realize that they speak about these actions that can be physically demanding, like on Monday, shoveling dirt, creating this pile of earth, or like yesterday, which is obviously an action that wouldn't need as much power or strength as the one on Monday, but that still signals to the fact that somebody did this. Somebody actually went through the trouble of not just placing some foil on top, but instead making it very, very tight. And that tightness, I think, was at the core of the painting. It wasn't about painting the foil. It wasn't about just being able to translate with naturalism the surface qualities of that foil. It wasn't about understanding how the light bounces. No, it was about that action that placed that foil in a very determined, specific way on top of that plate, covering that plate. So that was yesterday, and I thought that the actions that I was able to identify throughout these past couple of days were very obvious actions. And I wondered if I could just look around and try to find something that was visible, but that I could deem it as something that was far more subtle. And for today, what I spotted was something that is part of my everyday life, which is that every single day I wake up and I drink some tea. And in order to heat up the water, I turn on the electric kettle, and the button has this LED light underneath it or inside of it that emits this beautiful dim orange glow. But because it is 6 in the morning, I also get this very cool light. The sun hasn't risen yet from above the mountains. The Andean mountains are still covering the sun, but it is obviously light outside. So I'm getting a very, very cool grayish light in the morning. it is still not affecting the interior of our apartment as it would an hour and a half later at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning when there's no clouds, the sun would kind of beam straight into our apartment. For now, it's a very cool light, very gray, that suddenly has this tiny, tiny little light. I would never call it a light source. It's just almost like a firefly. This tiny little light that is reflecting on our cupboard also. That little light means that that button was pressed down. If I think about it, if I reflect upon it, it also means that somebody has put some water in this electric kettle and that the boiling water is eventually going to be used to do something, whatever it is. In my case, it is to just make some tea. Because what kind of animal would just press on that without pouring water inside the kettle? I don't know who does that. That would be absolute insanity. So as I was saying, I was happy that I was able to see this tiny little instance because it actually echoes what we've been talking about in the past couple of days, which is that there's a moment in time that can actually speak about past and also speaks about future. What we are seeing is this object that is in the midst of boiling water. It's in the middle of performing what it's meant to be used for. One of the more exciting things about this, I think, is that because I am the observer in all of this, because I am taking myself out of this picture in the sense that I'm trying to understand myself as somebody who is taking a step back and is just looking at these sets of actions. And because I am kind of taking myself out of the picture, I realize how different it is to just have the object, the electric kettle, as the sole subject of our painting. So in our painting, we're not going to have a person that's kind of waiting for the water to boil. We are not going to have a set table that is telling us that the water that is being boiled is going to be used later on for breakfast. We can only assume a bunch of things. We can only assume why things were done beforehand, and we can only assume what is that boiling water going to be used for after that. But because this is just the object and it's just been turned on, we don't have any real way to say, yeah, this is what's going to happen. So it's this very, very tense moment. And because I was wondering also about the absence of that human being, even though we can deduce that this was an action that was committed by a human being, the fact that there was a choice to depict a human being in this scene, and I chose not to do it, and I chose the painting to be about the object by itself, it actually projects a completely different feeling. And I have some very cool examples. To tie today with Monday's painting, we are going to start with a Frederic Church painting. And it's actually this study, although it was done a lot from his imagination, but it is a study that he did of the Parthenon at night. And what he has chosen to do, kind of following this weird lighting that he also did in the largest of the iceberg paintings, is to couple these two light sources, this very cool kind of yellowish, greenish, bluish light against this very warm light. Now, apparently this cool light comes from the inside of the Parthenon, while the redder light is actually off to the side, off to the left, and it is affecting the outside facade of the temple, but it also seems to be trickling inside. There is a moment where apparently those two lights mix. I think this is weird. I think as a rational lighting condition, this would be, maybe impossible. But take into consideration that this was Church just trying to make this up and just trying to fill this little painting with absolute drama, which it does have. It's insanely dramatic. And if you think about it, just putting these two artificial light sources, one almost signifies, life, and the other signifies death. It's the heavens and the underworld. That inner light that kind of points towards the skies, the cool yellow, green, bluish light speaks about the sort of sacred, eternal life of that temple, while that red light source speaks about the tragedy, the death of that temple, temple as ruin. So it is quite incredible to see how much he's able to get out of the mixing of these two light sources. But it is also quite beautiful that he has chosen to depict or to study this temple as this very kind of small shape. I don't know about you guys, but you almost lose sense of scale. It kind of feels as if it was a model, like a little model, like this is the Parthenon of a train set, which is kind of amazing, actually, I think. But the fact that it's empty, the fact that it's barren, the fact that it is temple as ruin, this is just a solitary object in the middle of this empty, arid environment. All you're seeing is how these two lights are affecting the manner in which we perceive this temple. The same thing happens in a beautiful, amazing painting of, and by now you guys know, one of my favorite contemporary painters, Ruprecht von Kaufmann, RVK. This is a painting that depicts the light of a TV becoming the light source in this interior, and this bed is unmade. There's a dent in the pillow. There's also a dent in the mattress with the sheets kind of caving in. There's this beautiful cast shadow that the sheets are projecting onto the back, and we are able to see the reflection of that TV in the window in the background, and we're also getting a bit of the reflection in that weird oval-shaped mirror that's off to the right upper side. And then if we go past the reflection on the window, we actually see some tree branches, and behind them we see what is probably either the moon or the reflection of a light bulb that is in the interior of this room. So it's quite a fascinating disposition of shapes. I just love that this room doesn't even have a horizon. There's no moment in this painting where the wall meets the flooring, the wooden flooring. No, the floor just abstractly becomes the wall. So there is a sense of this space not being kind of real or habitable in that way, or rationally habitable in that way. But even though the space is kind of telling us that we are not meant to inhabit it, there are clues that are telling us that somebody is there. I mean, obviously the unmade bed and the pillows, but there's also an ashtray on top of that television, and there's also a cup that's placed on the floor, and it sits right beside of that space that that person would have occupied when they were lying or sitting on the bed. So there's a ton of actions that we can again deduce from the displacement of all these objects, which is quite fascinating. And we don't need a human being depicted in this painting to understand that there is humanity in there, that there was a human presence at some point in this space that has now created all the choreography of forms that we currently see. Now, compare that to this Erich Fischl painting, where we can actually see the person that is inhabiting this space. This person is actually affected by that outer light, by that direct sunlight. She is on the phone. Her TV is on. These boxes are open. And what's actually super cool about this is that Fischl has this very strange way of not letting us truly understand what is going on. It's almost like we're in the middle of this action and we don't have the necessary information to understand where exactly we are placed. So what we can say about the image is that there is sound to this image. Maybe she used the phone, or maybe the phone has rang, she picked it up, and she's actually speaking. She's talking over the phone. The TV is on, but it's a very strange TV because it looks like an old CRT TV, but it has no knobs in there, but it is on. We can actually see an image there, and we can only suppose that there is sound coming out of this TV. We can also look at the boxes and say, well, those boxes are either being packed or being unpacked, because this kitchen is actually kind of barren also. There's nothing in there, so we don't really know if somebody has just moved in or they're moving out. So we are actually placed in this very ambiguous moment. We can kind of tell that something is going on. Like I said, there's sound to this painting, there's noise to this painting, but we can't really understand where this painting is going. We don't really how these actions are being directed and the future that awaits for us. So one of the coolest things about showing you guys images of how different it is when a human being inhabits a picture and when we decide as painters to have that presence be depicted not by the representation of a human being, but by the effects of our actions, the way we read the paintings can be entirely different. The feeling behind, the tone behind the paintings just changes dramatically. Now, both RUPRECHT's paintings and Eric Fischel's paintings, they have very different tones and they go to very different directions. And I think they are benefited by the sense that there is a bigger representation of the space. There is a bigger sense of scale in this representation of space, in this depiction of space. The painting that I was doing today, it's just this tiny little zooming into this one object, trying to almost echo the universe that is outside of the picture plane through the representation of this little object. So I don't have any of the elements that could speak about space, or the space being barren or empty, or the space being full. I can't speak of any of those things. I can only speak about one simple act, one tiny little act that is actually the catalyzer for future events that are going to be triggered. So today's painting is just about the tiny little press of a button. That's all it is. But what's awesome about it is that we can still identify that presence that we were talking about yesterday and the day before, and we can still imagine a sort of rational future for this image, which is just that water is going to boil. You're just going to pour it in a cup and you're going to have some tea probably, and that's about it. It's almost like that action ends there. But to me, it is amazing to see how, if we think about it in abstract terms, this tiny little dot of orange in this sea of coolness, which is almost like, as soon as I'm describing it, I'm thinking of Monet's Impression Sunrise painting, which is basically the same. But this tiny little dot of orange in the sea of coolness speaks about us, and it speaks about our humanity and everyday act that took place in our life, that with such a simple thing we can speak about the commonplace and about the everyday rituals of our life. I think that that is amazing. So that was it for today's painting. Join us tomorrow where we try to excavate. We're going into this archaeological expedition to try and find, little moments, little cues in our past or in our present that can speak about our presence or somebody else's presence in our life, and more importantly, without us needing to physically represent them while we are painting that painting. That's it for today. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Thank you. Bye.